Welcome to the December 2023 edition of Hunt Camp Mail. I hope everyone really enjoyed Scope Month. You know, I tried really hard to give you information that was different than what everybody else puts out there. You know, most of my mail this month was about optics, so those videos seemed very popular. I don't think I've ever crammed as much quality video content into 1 month before as I did during Scope Month. Between work, handling the holidays, handling household and family obligations, and trying to sneak away once in a while to shoot some birds, you know, between all of that, finding time to make those videos was challenging. Well, it's Christmas Eve morning, and basically tomorrow is Christmas, so it's the last day of the second dove season, the late dove season, and just got out here. It's about 7 in the morning. Sun just came up. Got my first one, and hopefully I get 14 more. What a wonderful way to spend Christmas Eve morning. Before I read the mail for this month, make sure you get your preferred adult beverage ready, because at the end of this video, we'll do the traditional desert dog toast. For those new to my channel, we've been doing a group toast every Christmas for the last 4 years, so get ready for that at the end of this video. So before I ramble on too long, let's get to December's mail. And our first letter for the month of December is from Zach in Arizona. Zach wrote, "I saw this article in the fall issue of Backcountry Hunter magazine and thought you might find it interesting." And he sent me a link to the article. The author was discussing a statistical program used to calculate probabilities of events. In this case, they were using a statistical modeling program to predict the chance of a shooter placing a shot in the kill zone of a deer at 700 yards and 10-mile-per-hour winds. The result was an astonishingly bad 30% probability of making a kill shot. Interestingly, they repeated the modeling, assuming 1/10 MOA accuracy, and the probability only improved by about 10%. No matter how you cut it, there's a 50-50 chance of wounding or missing that shot. And that's assuming a level of accuracy that I don't think anyone realistically achieves in the field. 1/10 of an MOA. This article, of course, pulls up short from actually telling people it's unethical to take these shots. And of course, it ended with ads for tactical rifles and some bro gospel. The bro gospel. Well, statistical modeling is interesting, but how about some real world stuff here? I remember when one of the biggest long range hunting groups decided to have a cold bore challenge. Basically, they had to set up a hunting rifle, not an F-class rifle or anything like that, an actual hunting rifle, and take one shot and whatever the conditions were, you know, the ambient conditions. And there was no sighters, fowlers, or warm-up shots allowed in that. There were no benches, no wind flags, and no spotters in that. This was straight field conditions, and only known shooters were allowed in that competition. And most of them missed the 10-inch steel target at 700 yards. You know, and every single one of those guys were posting on forums about long-range hunting is ethical if you know how to do it right, and we know how to do it right. But apparently most of them can't do it right. Even old Aram was a self-proclaimed long-distance hunting expert, and, you know, he was blowing the legs off a deer at that distance. So I think the statistical model that you presented to me does kind of mirror reality. And our next letter is from Steve in Wisconsin, and it's probably getting cold in Wisconsin about now, I imagine. Steve wrote, "I just watched your video on shot placement. I always thought the double lung or heart shots were the only way to go. I'm a fairly new hunter. I've been hunting for about 3 years now, and want to dive into the sport much more over my lifetime. You mentioned books on the topic of shot placement. Would you be able to recommend any?" Oh yeah, definitely I can recommend some for you. For African game, I highly recommend you get the books by Dr. Kevin Robertson. You know, he's got some of the bigger, you know, hardcover books on the subject, and, you know, also these handy little field guides on shot placement on African animals. For North American game animals, but which is probably what you're more interested in, I recommend you getting The Perfect Shot North America by Craig Boddington. And these books are pretty much all you'll ever need to get a mental image of what you're aiming at. And our next letter is from Charles from Pasadena, California. Charles wrote, I've been catching up on Hunt Camp Mail episodes, and you keep telling people not to believe comments or reviews on internet forums. You say they are mostly unreliable or fake. Wouldn't this also make the comments on your videos unreliable as well? What makes your YouTube content more reliable? Well, I don't know if your letter was meant to take a condescending tone, but I'm not taking it that way. It's pretty much a legitimate question, I think. And as I've stated many times about internet forums, a faceless person reviews a product without any proof that they even own that product. You know, and usually other people who probably also don't own that product chime in with their opinions, and voila, you suddenly have a thread 20 posts long about a product that nobody in that thread really owns, and that's an internet forum. YouTube is different. A YouTube creator has to actually have and use the product that they're reviewing, so YouTube is way less prone to bullshit. But as you wisely alluded to, the same people who used to post bullshit on internet forums are now commenting on YouTube videos. And, you know, I'll go right out and say it. A lot of people that post comments in my videos give really bad advice. You know, I try to go on there and set them straight when I can, but I have hundreds of videos, and each of those gets, you know, sometimes hundreds of comments, and I can't possibly keep up with it all to filter out the bullshit for you. You know, for example, in my recent Don't Break Your Scope video, people put a lot of horrible advice in there. You know, one person said that tightening by feel with a wrench is way more accurate than using a torque wrench. You know, one guy said to cut grooves inside your rings. You know, one guy advised people to use spray adhesive on your rings. You know, and another guy said to put paper shims in your rings before you tighten them. You know, that is all horrible advice, and I hope none of you listen to it. So yes, comments on videos can't be trusted, even on my videos. And our next letter for the month is from Mike in Dallas, Texas. Mike wrote, in your Don't Destroy Your Scope video, you warned us against using thread locker on ring screws. But I noticed that Leupold uses pre-installed blue Loctite on their ring screws, which contradicts your advice. I think you might be wrong on this one, Desert Dog. Well, I don't think I'm wrong on this, and I'm going to explain why. That's not Loctite that Leupold pre-installs on those screws like you think it is. Those screws are what are known as nylock patch screws. And it actually creates more friction on the screws, kind of like when you tighten a nylock nut versus a standard nut. The nylon patch basically compresses while you install the screw, which causes more friction and ultimately fights the effects of vibration on the installed product. It's a totally different approach to try to keep screws from backing off than Loctite, and behaves totally different than thread locker does. You know, rather than acting like a lubricant like thread locker does, nylock creates actually more friction. And when you buy those rings, the torque specs for those screws reflect that. So don't confuse Loctite with nylock. They're two completely different substances. And our next letter is from Ryan. And Ryan failed to provide where he's from, but Ryan wrote, "Hey Desert Dog, I was wondering, given your extensive use of copper bullets, is ricochets after deer pass-throughs a problem? I hunt in a farm in the east, so there are houses in most directions around the farm. Even making sure of a backstop, I worry about ricochets. This year I used a 6.5 Creedmoor loaded with Barnes LRX. I dropped the deer great, but I'm wondering if frangible bullets would be safer. What's your opinion? I've never heard anyone cover whether copper bullets are more likely to ricochet." Another excellent letter here. First of all, Ryan, any bullet can ricochet, so don't think you're safe just because you have a frangible bullet. But in my own anecdotal experience shooting thousands of Barnes bullets over 2.5 decades at steel targets and even at rocks, I personally haven't noticed an increase in ricochets. So I tried to find some credible scientific data and found a couple of studies on this. There was a 2009 UK study into the lethality and efficiency of copper hunting bullets, and they used Barnes bullets in that study. And they couldn't find any increased risk of ricochet using the copper bullets. But a more recent 2009 study done in the Czech Republic determined that the ricochet from monolithic bullets is actually more dangerous than cup and core bullets, which makes sense, actually. My common sense tells me that all bullets ricochet, but cup and core bullets do it in many tiny fragments, where a mono bullet like a Barnes bullet probably has a big copper shank deflecting off the target. And of course, that's ultimately going to be more dangerous. And our next letter is from Thomas from Ontario, Canada. And Thomas wrote, "When you brought up wet versus dry torque specifications, I celebrated because you are the first gun expert I've ever heard make that point. You are also the first gun expert I've ever heard use the terms clamping force and bolt tension, which are applicable to scope rings. I'm a mechanical engineer for a company that fabricates machinery. Some components use anti-seize or thread locker, and we arrive at wet torque specifications for those fasteners after thorough testing. For a dry torque specification, using any lubricant on the fastener will greatly increase clamping force beyond the intended value and may exceed the failure threshold of the fastener. Like you, I also have a suspicion that many people who damage scopes are using thread locker or failing to remove oil from the rings and screws before installation. Also, you really should do a hunting or fishing video in Canada. You have a good following here." I want to thank you for the fantastic letter and the compliments. Ring manufacturers have been telling people not to use thread locker on ring caps for decades, but people just seem to do it anyways. People who use thread locker are usually people with scopes that are slipping in the rings, and rather than realize that the rings probably need to be lapped, they torque the shit out of them and add thread locker instead. You'll seldom find a group of more stubborn and misguided enthusiasts as you will in the hunting world. And your comment about Canada, yeah, I planned a big fly fishing trip to Canada for Atlantic salmon a couple years ago, but I had to completely cancel all of my plans because your prime minister decided that he didn't want any filthy, unvaccinated Americans in his country. So hopefully Canada just gets rid of that guy. And our next letter is from Jake from Huntington Beach, California, my old stomping grounds. Jake wrote, "Didn't you say in previous videos you were a deckhand on a sport fishing boat? Got any great stories from that time?" Yeah, I actually do. I definitely saw everything from my days as a deckhand on a boat. I've seen everything from great white sharks to big molas, floating around in the water, to, a random dog swimming miles offshore, which we ended up rescuing. Just had to wonder how it got out there. I've been next to a water spout and saw a breaching whale barely miss our bow before, which would have put us all in the water. What I really miss is the aroma of those breakfast burritos on the grill mixed with diesel fumes. What a distinctive smell that is. And, I miss coming home every afternoon just covered in anchovy scales and having line cuts all over my fingers from untangling customers' lines. But, it was worth it when I had a pocket full of tips to have a good time with my friends. And our next letter is from John from Georgia. John wrote, I enjoyed the post on accurizing the X-bolt very much. I actually bought a composite stocked X-bolt and installed a Macmillan stock on it. It made a huge difference. Anyway, I am 6'5" and shooting off the bench is challenging for me. It looks like the bag you were using in the accurizing the X-bolt post could be the ticket. Can you share what that bag is and how tall you are? Well, if you're shooting off the bench for tight groups with a hunting rifle and you don't have a rabbit ear rear bag, you're probably not shooting tight groups. I'm 6 foot tall, and the rear bag that I used in that video is the Protector number 13. And you can order these directly from Protector's website, and you can pick the material and fill weight of the bag to individually suit your needs. And this is actually a great product for a cheap price, and it's 100% American made. And our next letter is from William, and William didn't state where he's from. William wrote, I believe you are being dramatic when you claim that Vortex has thin scope tube walls. Vortex scopes are much better than the scopes you recommended. Vortex scope tubes do not crush. I've seen thousands of Vortex scopes and none had a damaged tube. Thousands, huh? I don't like it when YouTube hunters make outrageous claims with no proof, because it makes good companies look bad. Merry Christmas, William. Bullshit! 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 I'm going to show you a video that I want you to watch, William. This following video I'm going to show you is filmed at the Vortex service department, where they admit that 70% of all the Vortex scopes that come in for repairs have crushed or distorted tubes. Check this out, William.
The worst thing that we see that comes across our claims department here is definitely crushed tubes. Our torque specs ask for 15 to 18 inch-pounds. A lot of times people are maybe not using a good torque wrench, or they're just not knowing the specs. 70% of the scopes that come in have crushed tubes. About 30% of the remaining scopes, I'm able to fix about 95% of those.
This is a cross-section of the scope. It's the side walls that get crushed.
So it's going to cause travel issues, it's going to cause parallax problems, and so on.
So you heard it straight from the horse's mouth. 70% of all the scopes that Vortex warranties have damaged tubes as the main cause of failure. So when I claim that Vortex scopes have weak tubes, I'm not pulling information out of my ass. It's actually a real thing. And, they're not the only company with this problem either. And our next letter is from Mark in Spokane, Washington. Mark wrote, even though Remington changed ownership a few years ago, it seems as though they are now going out of business. Everyone tells me that the new Remingtons are just as bad as the old ones. The company needs to learn that poor quality will sink them, which is probably why they are going out of business. Well, Mark, I personally haven't heard anything about them going out of business. And, I have some connections in the industry, and I just haven't heard that. But they did announce that they're shutting down their New York plant and moving their production to the state of Georgia. They're building actually a new production facility in Georgia. That's what I've heard. So, Remington claims that the taxes and the political climate in New York are the reason for them moving. And I believe them on that. I wouldn't want to manufacture guns in the state of New York. But maybe somebody confused shutting down their New York plant with going out of business. And the rumor eventually morphed into false information. But you are right on your other point. The new 870s and Model 700s that I've seen lately are just as rough, gritty, and poorly fit than the guns sold before the change of ownership. So hopefully things change when they start production at their new plant. And our next letter is from longtime fan of the channel, Hagen from Germany. Hagen wrote, "What are your thoughts on scopes with an integrated bottom rail like Zeiss, Swaro, Steiner, and other European manufacturers offer? Those would eliminate the torque problem and make mounting easier because they don't need to be leveled." Well, you're right, Hagen. European scopes with the integrated rail can be superior to using ringed scopes for many reasons. They eliminate the clamping forces on that scope tube that often cause problems. They're always perfectly level, and they make finding eye relief on a bolt-action rifle way easier, in my opinion. But they never caught on in most of the world because they kind of lack standardization, like a Picatinny rail has. Zeiss rails, Swarovski rails, and the Smith & Bender convex rail are not compatible systems with each other. And that's a problem to a lot of people. Americans, Canadians, Australians, and Africans usually have multiple scopes that from different manufacturers that they like to use across multiple rifles. So, I change scopes out on rifles all the time for various reasons. Sometimes a different scope is better for the type of hunting I want to do on a particular trip. So I'll swap them out. And all of my rings and mounts fit all of my scopes. So I'm happy with using the traditional system that involves scope rings. Aside from the standardization issue, another possible issue with European integrated rail systems on scopes is actually durability. European scope makers claim that the integrated rail is a more durable system than, rings in a pick rail. But most mechanical engineers completely disagree with that statement, especially when it comes to lateral forces on the scope. Currently, the German military uses rings and pick rails on all of its precision rifles. Every G22 and HK417 I've seen have rings and pick rails on them. And if that integral rail was more durable, don't you think that European militaries would be using those instead of rings? So a lot of the mechanical engineers, I think, have a point on the durability issue. Scopes with integrated rails on them are also a lot more expensive than standard scopes, which is kind of a turnoff to consumers too. And the modern rail designs on those scopes usually cause the scopes to sit a little higher than a regular low ring setup. And to be honest with you, I've hunted with many Europeans, and only a small handful of them have used scopes with that integral rail system. And it's mainly the guys, with the Blaser breakdown rifles. But, I do wish they'd standardize a system like that on a scope with an integral rail system and offer it on more scopes, even, more budget-minded scopes. And if something like that were ever to occur, I'd definitely use them on hunting rifles. And our next letter is from Rick in San Antonio, Texas. Rick wrote, "The SHV 3-10x42 that you reviewed is becoming very popular here in Texas. Most rifles in my area bounce around in a Polaris Ranger all season. The SHV is the only scope I've ever used that holds up to that without shifting the zero. I've heard people say that the Night Force 3-10 SHV is the Glock 19 of hunting scopes. It doesn't have the glass like a Swarovski, but I still think this SHV scope will outlast those more expensive scopes. With the growing popularity of this scope, you should do a video on it. You know, I did a review basically in my best $1,000 scope thing, so I think I'll just leave it at that. But calling the SHV the Glock 19 of hunting scopes is actually a great analogy in my opinion. You know, it's not some fancy target scope, and it's very plain and utilitarian. It's also very heavy. It's also a very heavy and kind of clunky scope for its size. You know, it has decent glass. According to Night Force, it has the same glass as the NXS scopes, but it's definitely a step below, you know, high-end Leupold glass or high-end European glass. Night Force actually redesigned the SHV 3-10 about, you know, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And hunters were mainly buying this scope as a set it and forget it scope. And hunters really didn't like the tactical reticle options, and they wanted illumination on this scope. So Night Force redesigned the 2-10 SHV and offered a nice duplex reticle called the Forceplex reticle. And they also did away with the parallax adjustment on the side and added illumination instead, which I think was a great step on a 3-10 power scope. Night Force actually listened to hunter feedback and made changes to the 3-10 SHV scope, and I think they did a good job on it. You know, and although these aren't built like the more premium Night Force scopes in my opinion, these are the toughest and most reliable set it and forget it scope out there. But, you know, you can easily take the caps off of these and dial if you want to. And these probably have the best capped turret design in the business. And, you know, they're all metal, no plastic in there, on the turrets or below the turrets. So these are a great reliable scope. And our next letter is from Lewis from Salt Lake City, Utah. Lewis wrote, I found your channel last month when a buddy sent me a link because you were talking about Utards. As a Utah resident, I got a kick out of that. I'll also admit that hunting ethics are in short supply in this state. Everyone thinks the state is full of Mormons and Californians, but in reality, we have an entire subculture of backwards white trash that would put Arkansas to shame, and most of them hunt. Thank you for publicly calling out unethical hunters. I'm sick of the hunting media pretending it doesn't happen. P.S. Sell that property in Arizona and buy that land in Utah. You will be much happier as a Utard than a cactus muncher living in the oven state. So Arizonans are cactus munchers. You know, I certainly don't want to be one of those. But if you think Utah has a white trash subculture, I invite you to visit Oildale, California. An Oildale redneck will completely lower the bar on what you consider to be white trash, trust me. And our next letter is from Nathan from Eastern Washington. Nathan wrote, do you have any experience or stories regarding the 6x45's cartridge use in Africa? I had mine built many years ago based on stories of Africa PHs using the little 6mm to feed many mouths they're responsible for in the bush, including trackers, cooks, camp staff, clients, and themselves by hunting the smaller antelope species with it. Stated attributes were economically friendly, accurate, and zero meat damage. Their bullet preference is a 100-grain round nose going roughly 2,500 feet per second, like a mini 375 H&H. Well, I know Wikipedia is probably telling you that the 6x45 is extremely popular in Africa, but it's just not as popular as you think, Nathan. You know, it does get used there, but every single cartridge out there gets used in Africa. By contrast, the 243 is extremely popular in Africa to get meat. Way more popular than the 6x45. And rifles and ammos for 243 are everywhere in Africa. And as a side note to this, in this kind of niche getting cat meat, I'm always amazed at how popular the 22-250 is in Africa. Mainly for varmints and small game. It might be more popular in Africa than it is here in the States. And our next letter is from Phil from Stockton, California. Phil wrote, "It is hilarious how your latest video is called the best $1,000 deer scope, and you make it a point to clearly tell everyone you will not be reviewing cheap budget scopes. Then everyone comments about how great their 400 scope is in the comments. In the consumer studies field, we call this post-purchase rationalization. As a byproduct of post-purchase rationalization, customers usually seek to lash out against consumers of better quality products as a way to cope with the results of their purchase decision. Out of all of my many hobbies, hunters are the most vulnerable to marketing and the psychology of pricing. How is my analysis?" I always love these letters. I've never heard of post-purchase rationalization before, but thank you for the education. We might have to classify a similar condition called cartridge rationalization syndrome. I think people just don't know the difference between a quality product and a lower quality option. Honestly, many people don't know the difference because it's just not important to them. If they think that their $400 Burris scope has glass like a Swarovski, they obviously haven't used a Swarovski, and we know that. And you just have to accept that fact. They can't know what they don't know. If someone thinks their $300 Arkin is as tough as a Night Force, they definitely don't know the difference. Like I said, they can't know what they don't know. Many people in this country hunt from stands or blinds or kind of out of a vehicle, and any scope is going to last them a long time and do good for them. Most people aren't dialing for elevation or doing complex load development, and honestly, most hunters probably wouldn't even know it if their scope was bad. And our next letter is from Alexander from Australia, and I have a big following in Australia. Love you guys. Alexander wrote, "Greetings from Queensland. I watched a video yesterday, and a seppo," by the way, that's what Aussies call Americans behind our back. It means septic tank. Anyways, a seppo was shooting deer with a .22 Magnum and shot it 3 times before hitting the brain. Everyone hassled this wanker about using an unethical caliber. He insisted that a .22 mag is plenty to kill a deer. Everybody does it, and his family does it too. Does this shite happen all the time in the States? No, Alexander, it's not normal at all. And mostly poachers do crap like this. It's illegal to shoot a deer with a .22 Magnum in 45 out of our 50 states. And it really should be illegal in all 50 states, in my opinion. And our next letter is from CJ from Denver, Colorado. CJ wrote, "I went hunting with my cousin this year because he drew a deer tag. I hunt birds and rabbits, but this was the first deer hunt I've been on. My cousin had a rangefinder, and we found a buck on a hillside at almost 800 yards. He shot at the deer 7 times and finally hit it in the neck, and it ran. We found some blood, but the deer got away. That hunt bothered me to the point where I couldn't sleep for a couple nights. I searched the internet and found your video about long-range hunting and finally realized why that deer hunt bothered me so bad. That deer suffered because my cousin thought he was a good shot. He had a wind monitor and a program on his phone, but that didn't seem to matter. After watching your video, I confronted him and he got very defensive. He claims that he is an expert shot and blames the box of ammo for being bad and missing that shot. I will never hunt with him again. Well, I applaud you for standing up to your cousin and calling out his unethical behavior, but hopefully you didn't call him out at the Christmas table. I've done stuff like that before, and it doesn't end well. You know, if he's blaming the ammo, he's never going to realize that he's the actual problem. You know, you could put logic in his head and try to help put him on an ethical path to hunting, but you know, he has to be a reasonable person to see that and change. You know, he's probably like the guy who believes it when his wife tells him size doesn't matter. You know, he knows the truth but wants to believe the opposite. And our next question is from Craig in Nova Scotia. Craig wrote, if you could only shoot one powder for the rest of your life but could load all bullets and cartridges you wanted, what would that powder be? What darling loadings would you still have, and what loadings would you be mourning? Oh, one of these hypotheticals again. You know, and that's a real tough one to answer right there. Probably tougher than the cartridge or rifle hypothetical questions I get. You know, H4350 will keep me in action with a lot of different cartridges. You know, it's just dead right in the middle of the burn rate chart for rifle cartridges. But rather than consider what might work in a pinch, I think I'd have to consider what the rifles I use like the best, and the bullet weights I use, what they like the best. You know, my 22-250, 25-06, 6.5s, and 30-06s, absolutely love H4350. But my 6mm Dasher, my 7mm 08, 35 Whelen, and 416 Rem Mag, those loads mainly like Varget. You know, it's kind of a wash, but with either powder, I'd still be mourning my 300 H&H and my 458 lot. And our next letter is from John O. That's all he put, John O. John O wrote, would you eat meat from an animal that you knew was infected with chronic wasting disease? If so, what precautions would you take? Well, lucky for me, chronic wasting disease has never been found on deer and elk in my state of California. The other states that I frequently hunt either have 0 cases of chronic wasting disease or it's extremely rare there. So it's really not something I think of, to be honest with you. But to answer your question, I would not eat an animal infected with chronic wasting disease, ever. And our next letter is from Vincent in Merced, California. Vincent wrote, thank you for the video about troubleshooting scope issues and lapping rings. I ordered the cheaper eBay sliding ring alignment tool from your link in that video, and I just now received it. My Remington 700 never shot good. After watching the scope videos you posted, I did a scope test and found out that my Vortex scope was not good. I don't have a suitable second scope, so I removed the scope from the rings and used the alignment testing tool. The ring alignment was way off. I was mad because these are very expensive Vortex rings. I drove an hour to Bass Pro Shops and bought a Wheeler lapping kit and lapped the rings slowly like you recommended. I cleaned everything up and remounted the same scope using the Wheeler's torque wrench. Before installing, I also centered the scope reticle with a mirror like you instructed. The reticle was way off in the mirror. I just put the rifle together and shot it, and this gun shoots great 3-shot groups over and over again. Before, my groups would start to wander, and I always had to re-zero my rifle. I think taking the stress off the scope tube helped, and I'm glad I didn't have to buy a new scope. If you are ever in Merced, I owe you a beer or 2 or 3. Well, thank you for the kind comments, and I'm glad it worked out for you. I mean, It makes me feel good when I make videos like that, and it actually helps people. And I've seen exactly what you described many times over the years. Honestly, most hunters just live with it, but I'm glad you decided not to live with it and proactively try to solve your issue. I'm also glad that you got lucky and your scope wasn't permanently damaged. Usually when a Vortex scope or maybe even a loop-pulled scope gets to that point, it needs to go back to the factory. Scope tubes with erector assemblies and focus lenses moving around inside the tube don't like it when the tube is bent or distorted. I also doubt that the rings were the main culprit. In all likelihood, the bases or that rifle receiver were the main issue with misalignment, and lapping the rings just took that all out and made everything right with the world again. So I'm glad it worked out for you. And our last letter is from Lucas from British Columbia, Canada. Lucas wrote, "We all love to watch Desert Dog. That is a fact. But what YouTube hunting channels does Desert Dog watch?" Huh. I absolutely love watching YouTube. I just love the platform. But most of the channels I watch actually deal with fishing, off-roading, football, history, and current events and news. I actually watch very little hunting content because I just don't personally like a lot of it that's out there. I tend to mostly watch hunting content from small channels. As long as they have decent editing skills, and it's not just some guy walking around for an hour with a GoPro on his head. As long as they have good editing skills, the guys solo filming their hunts with like a GoPro on their head makes some pretty awesome content, in my opinion. But honestly, most of the hunting content I watch is made by guys with very few subscribers and usually nothing but a GoPro, and I like watching genuine experiences and genuine hunts rather than, fabricated hunts, for YouTube clicks or, guys pimping products for manufacturers. Well, that wraps up this episode of Hunt Camp Mail. Here's some memes for the month of December. as we end 2023, I just noticed that my channel hit 30,000 subscribers. My old YouTube channel grew very fast, but when I was forced to start over with a new channel about 6 years ago, after YouTube basically froze and demonetized my old channel, this channel has actually grown very slowly and steadily. When I started this channel, I vowed to stop posting meaningless content, like shooting gel blocks and reviewing free crap that companies would send me. This channel was basically a fresh start to do things right. To only post content with substance and to teach others what I know and to learn from others as well. And I think in that regard, this channel has been a big success. Even though I provide the content, the success of this channel falls solely on the interest of my subscriber base like you. And I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting this channel over the years. So I'd like to propose a toast to health, happiness, and success at attaining your goals, to family, friends, and even your loyal pets, to epic hunts and memorable days on the water, and to the Desert Dog Outdoors family, which you are all a part of. Cheers, salute, and prost. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to everyone. And please have a safe new year. You can reach me with any questions or comments at desertdogoutdoors@gmail.com. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.